Hey, I'm Henry, and recently I've been getting into reading comics, particularly Spider-Man, as you can see. I wanted to get more into him after watching No Way Home, but it's fair to say that I've read a couple of stories here. I read the Todd McFarlane run, I've read some of Dan Slott's run, I read a bit of Bendis, a bit of Lee and Ditko, and I've been reading this Spider-Man and the X-Men miniseries because it has the dinosaur cancer image, which we are all familiar with and all love. It is shockingly heavy. But today, I want to take a step back from the reading. I want to jump headfirst into this and explain a few things for new readers of Spider-Man comics, because I jumped into this headfirst without really any clue, and yeah, it worked out well enough for me, but I would have loved to have a video kind of like this that explained a few of the better ones and which ones to kind of avoid, maybe. So let's jump into this. I'm gonna explain my favorite writer, which one of them overall was my favorite. I'm gonna explain my least favorite, and then I'm just gonna give a general recommendation of where to start. So let's begin with my favorite writer. Overall, my favorite writer I think has to be Slott. I read Spider-Verse, which is very good, and Red Goblin, which I heard mixed things on, but I really liked both of these. His writing style is really interesting. He seems to really understand the character. I read these both after reading Lee and Ditko, and I don't want to be rude or anything, but they were almost boring-ish, and in this, it seems that Slott really understands the character. There's action, but during this action, Spider-Man's attempting to save as many normal civilians as possible, and all the while, he is cracking quips. They even joke about how he's scared and you shouldn't be making jokes, but he just continues to make jokes about it. It's nice, and I really think that Slott is the best of the modern writers for Spider-Man, and if you want to jump in with just a specific writer's run, Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man is very good. If you want to jump in specifically to Slott, I would recommend starting with Spider-Verse. I know it's a bit of an odd one, but it is legitimately amazing. A lot different than the movie. I'm not going to spoil much here, but I just really love the story. Next up is my own personal favorite of all the comic arcs I read, and it would have to be Michael Bendis's, or is it Michael Bendis? Michael Bendis, it is! Look, I'm not gonna lie, I think this is a better origin story for Peter Parker than the Lee and Ditko run. Now, that may sound blasphemous to a few fans, and maybe it is, but honestly, the writing in this, it's so much more dynamic. The action, it's so much more impactful. In this story, it takes 5 issues to kill Uncle Ben, so I really felt a genuine connection where Peter, yes, he has a lot of respect for his uncle, but he doesn't see him as a father figure until it's too late. And it's really emotional, and I love the connection they have. Peter in this run legitimately feels like a teenager. He is angry, but he just wants to do his best. He wants to get rich quick. He wants to make the extra buck, but he doesn't want to be like a total annoyance. He doesn't want to be a bad person, and he understands that eventually, and he learns that with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Title. I really enjoyed how long it took for Peter to actually become Spider-Man, because realistically, you wouldn't just get bit by a spider and be like, oh, okay, now I'm a spider-themed superhero. He got bit by the spider and didn't become Spider-Man until like the last issue in this. And yeah, that means there's less specifically Spider-Man action, but there's a lot more action of Peter Parker, you know, doing wrestling, playing basketball, jumping out of the way of assassins hired by Oscorp. It's really interesting. I like Michael Bendis's more character-driven stories here. I can already see the seeds of great dynamics between Peter and Liz Allen and Mary Jane, like that scene where Peter goes to one of the bullies' apartment because he just got in a fight with Uncle Ben, and then Mary Jane comes over and sees that Peter is talking to Liz. I felt, wow, that's the seeds for some great character growth and events to happen. Overall, I think this is an incredible comic that is just really amazing, and I can't wait to read more of Ultimate Spider-Man. Oh, this opinion's gonna get to me in a little bit of a pickle. This is what I think is the worst comic I read. Now, I want to make it very clear. It being my least favorite in no means makes it bad. I still think it's good, and I can see how this inspired readers and made people excited for years to come. This is, of course, Mighty Marvel Masterworks Volume 2 of Spider-Man, so this is the origins of the Sinister Six. And this is written, of course, by Stan Lee, and it has Steve Ditko in there, too, and look, it's a classic, but I can't lie. Up until the Sinister Six part, which is the midway point of this collection, it was all good. And then it just became a chore. It was the only one that I was reading, I was just like... It was the only one I legitimately just wanted to finish, to have done, so I could move on. And that should never really be the goal when reading a comic. Now, I'm sure if I read them as individual issues back in the 60s, it would be a whole different story. And that's the whole thing. I think that reading this as one solid chunk makes it feel like more of a slog. Because this story doesn't have one overarching arc, each comic is an individual story with an individual villain that has an individual plan, and it makes everything seem sort of start, stop, rather than newer, more modern comics having long-lasting arcs that continue on for like 4 or 5 comics that can then be collected into one singular collection. I will say though, despite this being my least favorite, I did really love the annual #1, which is the formation of the Sinister Six. I thought that was a real high point of this comic. It just really sucks to me how, like, right after that, it drops dramatically and it just becomes boring almost. But of course, that leaves us with, which comic do I think you should all start with? And my answer is unsurprising. Look, not only does this comic give you an origin story for Peter Parker, it is a more modern retelling, so it feels a lot more alive and dynamic. The characters are fleshed out and have actually interesting plot points and stories that are going to be developed later. And overall, this is just amazing and is legitimately the best place that you can start. I absolutely love it. It is impeccable, and I cannot wait to read Volume 2, which is Learning Curve. That one looks good. Of course, though, not everyone wants to read the Ultimate Comics because they're their whole own universe. I believe Earth 6160 or 1606, if I'm not wrong. And some people want some Earth 616 content. And if you want to start with that, I would recommend Spiderman Red Goblin. This takes place in the normal Marvel continuity, not a otherworld continuity. So this is still affecting things today. This is a really great story. It maybe isn't the best introduction. I'm not sure. Maybe I liked it more because I had read a lot of the character beforehand, but this was really good. I was just a big fan of this. Carnage and Green Goblin merging together into one villain made a legitimately, like, threatening character for Spider-Man to have to face, and he got a lot of friends and a lot of cameos in this, and it was just a fun read. I highly recommend this if you don't want to start with Power and Responsibility by Bendis. So that was that. I just ranked a couple of the Spider-Man comics I read, and honestly, from what I've read, I've just had a fun time. If not anything else, I'm just glad I read it because I have a more fully developed understanding of the character, I feel. I think that if you want to read this character, whatever you start with is going to be fine. I do want to have one honorable mention, though. Achieving the award of the comic that made me cry, it's Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man #6. This is the only comic in the Friendly Neighborhood run I own, but I cried when I read this. If you know the story, you'll know why. If you don't know the story, I recommend reading it. It's cheap and it's good. So that's everything. Are you going to read any of these comics? If so, leave them down below. And if you've read Spider-Man before, what are your favorite stories that he's had? Personally, I think Spider-Verse is just amazing, and so is Bendis' run so far, but you've heard me blab on about Bendis enough. Hope you've had a nice start to your February. I hope that you enjoy this background, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of this Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man, so I'm making February Spider-Man. Enjoy.